Later, if you would like to come up to the front, you are more than welcome to. Otherwise, feel free to stay where you are. But jazakallah khairan for joining us, inshallah, today. Thank you.
Can you use the other one? I just need to spread it out.
Assalamu alaikum. Can you all hear me? What about like that? A little better? Okay, alhamdulillah. Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulihil kareem. Jazakallah khair for that introduction. No, it's okay. So my name is Lubaba Abdullah. I am an attorney. I have been practicing for almost over 15 years. Alhamdulillah, I graduated I had my son and I graduated from law school within like 3 months. And so I'm always like, how old is Yusuf? How many years have I been practicing? And then subhanAllah, I started doing estate planning right after my daughter was born. So whenever I'm like, and Islamic estate planning, I've been doing that for as long as my daughter's been born, which is 12 years, alhamdulillah. So I sometimes do these presentations with my dad. My dad is Sheikh Muhammad Abdullah. The Sheikh was born and raised in Sudan, and then he went to Mecca and did his bachelor's there at Al-Qura, and then he went to University of Medina for his master's in Hadith. And then he was recruited by the then Nation of Islam to come actually here to the United States and help transition them from Nation of Islam to mainstream Islam. So he moved to Chicago to work with the Mubarak community and did that for almost 20 years. And while he was doing that, he received another master's from the University of Chicago. He was really active in the Muslim community for almost 2 decades, serving as the president of Islamic Society of North America, serving on the Fiqh Council of North America since 1982. And then he moved back to Sudan for about 15 years, right after I had my son again. Graduated law school, had my son, graduated law school. My dad moved to Sudan with my mom and all of my brothers and sisters. So they were there for about 14 years, and then they came back here, and by that time I had settled here in Houston, and so alhamdulillah they came here, and they had been here for the last 2-4 years or so. So today what we're going to talk about is we're going to go over a brief overview of what is an estate. When we talk about estate planning, what is an estate? What does that mean? We're also going to talk about the importance of having an Islamic will, the basic requirements of a will under Sharia, as well as what do you need to have a will under the state of Texas? What are the consequences of not having a will? And then the last thing that we're going to touch base upon are what are trusts, revocable living trust or irrevocable trusts, why do some people use them, and then we will follow up by just talking about waqfs or endowments and what is the importance of an endowment and how does that fit into this greater scheme. Okay, alhamdulillah. Let me actually turn on my slideshow. It's showing it on the wrong screen. Do you know how to switch that?
There go to display settings. Display setting. And then,
Gotcha. Second with that. Perfect.
first mode, بجرب.
وإذا بيطلع معك أفضل.
بجرب إن شاء الله.
So what is an estate? When you talk about estate planning, an estate is the total of a person's property. So it's all of your property, all of your real estate, all of your entitlements, any of your obligations. So it can be real property like land. It can be personal property, which is movable property. So cars, cash, jewelry, artwork, securities, copyrights, patents, trademarks, goodwill. That is all a part of your estate. In the Quran, Allah, we just finished Ramadan, and we know that in Ramadan, Allah wrote, when He ordered us to fast, He wrote, Kutiba alaykum as-siyam, right? It was written for you, it was prescribed for you to fast. Likewise, Allah writes in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 180, Kutiba alaykum idha hadara ahadukum al-maut, in taraka khayran al-wasiyyatu lil-walidayni wal-aqrabina bil-ma'ruf, haqqan 'ala al-muttaqin. It is prescribed that when death approaches any of you, if they leave something of value, a will should be made in favor of parents and immediate family with fairness. This is an obligation on those who are mindful of Allah. Another verse that came down before the specifics of Sharia, before the specifics of estate planning, was this one that says, لِلرِّجَالِ نَصِيبٌ مِّمَّا تَرَكَ الْوَالِدَانِ وَالْأَقْرَبُونَ وَلِلنِّسَاءِ نَصِيبٌ مِّمَّا تَرَكَ الْوَالِدَانِ وَالْأَقْرَبُونَ مِمَّا قَلَّ مِنْهُ أَوْ كَثُرَ نَصِيبٌ مَّفْرُوضًا. For men, there is a share in what their parents and close relatives leave, and for women, there is a share in what their parents and close relatives leave. Whether it is little or much, these are obligatory shares. So we know that before Islam came, subhanAllah, as a mercy to humankind. Before Islam, many times women were not just not allowed to inherit, they were considered a part of the inheritance. So there is a story of a man who came in and his brother died, and he took his shawl and he threw it over his sister-in-law, or his former sister-in-law, right, since his brother had just deceased. And that was his way of showing that she now belonged to him. So this verse came down showing that men got a share and women got a share. And again, it is prohibited to change the ordained shares or use the will as a means of causing harm or oppression. Two hadith that I will just touch about quickly. It is the duty of a Muslim who has anything to bequest not to let 2 nights pass without writing a will about it. This is in Sahih Bukhari. And the other one is, a man may do good deeds for 70 years, but if he acts unjustly when he leaves his last testament, the wickedness of his deed will be sealed upon him and he will enter the fire. If, on the other hand, a man acts wickedly for 70 years but is just in his last will and testament, the goodness of his deed will be sealed upon him and he will enter the garden. And Abu Hurairah said that it was 6 years and not 7 years, but what the meaning is, it's a lifetime. So you could do good for a lifetime, and subhanAllah, at the end of your life, you leave your will, you act unjustly, and that might be the thing that sends you to hellfire. May Allah protect us all. But you can also do wickedly for a lifetime, but if he is just in his last will and testament, the goodness of his deed will be sealed upon him and he will enter the garden. So this is the importance of having this written down and making sure that we are doing it in a way that is just, in a way that complies with Sharia, in a way that complies with the laws. So here in America, you have to have a will. You have to be truthful and fair in leaving your estate, and that's towards your parents and your family. And living here in America with the intestacy laws, which if you don't have a will, the state of Texas has a plan for you, and we'll talk about that later. It becomes obligatory on Muslims to have this written down, because that's the only way that we can make sure that when we die, our things go according to Islamic law. So this is called the ilm al-faraid, the subject of injunctions concerning inheritance. This is what inheritance, estate planning is in Sharia. It is called the ilm al-faraid. It involves knowing the rules for dividing the inheritance and distributing it so that each of the heirs receives his or her proper share. This was called half of knowledge because it affects all people. Who inherits under Islamic law? I'll turn off the lights, which I'm going to just call on people. Usually I would just start calling on people at this point. Make sure people are staying awake, right? So this is a circle of heirs. So the spouse always inherits. No matter what, the spouse always inherits. If you have someone in the inner circle, like parents or children, then they inherit and nobody outside of that inherits. If, let's say, you don't have parents, but you have grandparents or great-grandparents, they inherit in lieu of the parents. Brothers and sisters inherit, again, if there are no parents and there are no children. And then if you don't have parents, grandparents, and you don't have siblings or their children, that's when maternal aunts and uncles and their children, or paternal aunts and uncles and their children will inherit. Who does not inherit? Non-Muslims do not inherit. So if your spouse is not Muslim, she would not inherit. She would not get specific shares from Sharia. An apostate, someone who has left Islam, does not inherit. Someone who kills, either directly or indirectly, someone who he inherits from. People who die simultaneously, like a family in a car accident, and there's no way to determine who died first, they also do not. Yes. Okay, is this better? Okay, alhamdulillah. For the non-Muslims, you can leave them something and you will see it. You can leave them a bequest. You have up to 1/3 of your estate that you can do whatever you want to with, and that's where you can do this. How many verses in the Quran talk about inheritance? You can shout out the answer if you know. Who thinks it's more than 10 verses? Okay, more than 10 verses. Who thinks it's more than 20 verses? Who thinks it's more than 5 verses? Who thinks it's only 3 verses? It's only 3 verses. So when you look at inheritance and inheritance law in the Quran, the division of the shares, there's only 3 verses in the Quran that deal with this. And they're all Surah Nisa, the 4th surah, the 4th chapter, verses 11, 12, and 176. Verse 11 starts, and it talks about God commands you regarding your children. The share of a male will be twice that of a female. If you leave only 2 or more females, their share is 2/3 of the estate. But if there's only 1 female, her share will be 1/2. So if you've got children, your son will receive double what your daughters receive. If you only have daughters, one receives 1/2 of the estate, 2 or more receives 2/3 of the estate. Why does a daughter receive half of her brother's share? Sisters, why do your daughters receive half of what their brothers have?
She inherited from many other sources that
Okay, she does not have any financial obligations. What would you say?
she inherited from dad and the husband and the son also. That's why.
So when we were doing so my dad and I have been doing this for a very long time. And so when my son was little and we did this, he went to school and his teacher the next day, he was in maybe kindergarten, 1st grade. She's like, "Is everything okay?" And I was like, "Yes, we're good." She's like, "Are you sure?" I was like, "Yes." She's like, "Is your dad okay?" And I'm like, "Yes, my dad's great, alhamdulillah." She's like, "Yusuf told me that his dad wants to die." And I was like, "Oh, so we were doing this estate planning and talking about death and what happens after death." So what my son took away from this at the age of 5, 6 was that his father wanted to die. My daughter, on the other hand, when she was 5 or 6, came up with a song as far as why she does not have to spend anything on herself and how her brother has to spend on her. And so she spent a few weeks where she just sang this song about how her brother has to spend on her and she doesn't have to spend on anything and he just has to take care of her. And so that's exactly it, right? Women do not have the expense of jihad. They do not have the expense of maintaining herself or her family. Nor does she have to pay blood money if it's mandatory. So Islamic law, Sharia, is not aimed at elevating one gender over the other, but it's to create a stable and balanced society. And this is one of the ways that Allah does it. So yes, your brother will receive double what your daughters get, but with that comes a religious obligation that they have to care for their sisters, they have to care for their mothers, they have to care for their family. The verse continues to talk about parents. Each parent is entitled to 1/6. So in this case, mom and dad get 1/6, they get the exact same if you leave offspring. So each parent is entitled to 1/6 if you leave offspring. But if you're childless and your parents are the only heirs, then your mother will receive 1/3 and your father receives the rest. But if you leave siblings, then your mother will receive 1/6 after the fulfillment of the bequests or debts. So again, if the deceased left children, mom and dad each get 1/6. If there are no children, mom gets 1/3 and dad gets the rest. And again, dad gets the rest because dad has those financial obligations while mom does not. If deceased has brothers and sisters, mom gets 1/6 and dad gets the rest. The siblings do not inherit because again, the understanding is once the parents pass away, it's the siblings that will inherit. This verse closes off by talking about be fair to your parents and children as you do not fully know who is more beneficial to you. This is an obligation from God. Surely God is all-knowing, all-wise. SubhanAllah, in the work that I do, there's a lot of times where people are like, oh, that child is not going to help, or that child is not going to support me, that child is not going to take care of me. And what Allah is telling us, Allah knows everything, right? So SubhanAllah, His hikmah, the wisdom in when He's talking about parents and children, He closes off the verses because you don't know who's going to be more beneficial for you. This child that might have been very dutiful to you might be the one that doesn't do anything for you in your old age. The opposite could also be true. That child who did not take care of you, right, could be the child that is paying sadaqah on your behalf, right, giving you sadaqah jari. They could be the one that turns and becomes a friend of Allah and is the one that's constantly making dua for you. So you don't know who is going to be beneficial, right? Allah tells us when a person dies, their good deeds come to an end except for 3. Sadaqah jari, an ongoing charity, beneficial knowledge, and nafi'an, and a righteous child who will pray for them. So you don't know what will happen, only Allah does, but these are the rules that Allah has put to test us. Verse 12 goes on to talk about husband and wives. You will inherit half of what your wives leave if they are childless. But if they have children, then your share is 1/4 of the estate after the fulfillment of bequests or debts. And your wives will inherit 1/4 of what you leave if you are childless. But if you have children, then, and your wives will inherit 1/4 of what you leave if you are childless. But if you have children, then your wives will receive 1/8 of your estate after the fulfillment of bequests and debts. So the husband receives 1/2 of the wife's estate if she has no children. He receives 1/4 if she has children. And the wife receives 1/4 of the husband's estate if he has no children, and she receives 1/8 if he has children. And if there are co-wives, they will share in the 1/4 and 1/8. The verse closes off by talking about kalala. Kalala is someone who dies with neither ascendants, nor parents or grandparents, nor descendants, nor children or grandchildren. And if a man or a woman leaves neither parents nor children, but only a brother or a sister from their mother's side, they will each inherit 1/6. But if they are more than one, they will all share 1/3 of the estate, after the fulfillment of bequests or debts, without harm to the heirs. This is a commandment from God, and God is all-knowing and most forbearing. So again, if someone is deceased is kalala, which means leaving no ascendants and no descendants, but has brothers and sisters, they receive 1/6 each if there are only 2 siblings. If they are more than that, they share in the 1/3. Allah closes this section, right? So you've got verse 11 and 12 that talk about inheritance, and then Allah closes them by talking about that these are the limits set by God. Whoever obeys God and His messenger will be admitted into gardens under which rivers flow to stay there forever. That is the ultimate triumph. But whoever disobeys God and His messenger and exceeds their limits will be cast into hell to stay there forever, and they will suffer a humiliating punishment. And may Allah protect us all from that. So the Sahaba really struggled with that verse on Kalala about the brothers and sisters if you have no parents and no children, and including Umar and Abu Bakr Siddiq. They kept asking about it. So Allah revealed the last verse of Surah Nisa, verse 176, where the Quran says, they ask you for a ruling, O Prophet. Say, God gives you a ruling regarding those who die without children or parents. If a man dies childless and leaves behind a sister, she will inherit 1/2 of his estate, whereas her brother will inherit all of her estate if she dies childless. If this person leaves behind 2 sisters, they together will inherit 2/3 of the estate. But if the deceased leaves male and female siblings, a male's share will be equal to that of 2 females. God makes this clear to you so that you do not go astray, and God has perfect knowledge of all things. So again, this verse only talks about kalala, no ascendants or descendants, and the man dies leaving only full siblings or paternal half-siblings. So if there's 1 sister, she receives 1/2. 2 or more sisters receive 2/3. Both brothers and sisters, and the sister receives 1/2 of her brother's share. And if a woman dies leaving only brother or brothers, he inherits everything. If there's multiple of them, then they share equally. And again, Allah closes, God makes this clear to you, so do not go astray, and God has perfect knowledge of all things. So the verses talked a lot about wasiyah, right, which is a bequest, or dain, which is a debt. Which one is more important? If you look at the verses, they talk about the fulfillment of bequests and debts. They talk about bequests and then debts. Is that the order that they have to be paid in? I have someone saying no. And that's right. After any bequest he may have made or debt. This is mentioned 4 times in verses 11 and 12 in Surah Nisa. And it stresses the importance of fulfilling the deceased wasiyahs and paying their debts. A lot of times people will say, you know, if the deceased is like, you know, I want to build a well, or I want to donate to the masjid, or I want to create the Sadaqah Jariyah. A lot of times people are like, oh, you know, that's not as important. Let's just make sure that we pay the debts and make sure that everyone gets their obligatory shares. But Allah mentions the wasiyah first to tell us that that is important. That Allah stresses its importance with Allah, even though debts have to be paid first. So this is up to 1/3 of the estate can be given to charity, or those who are not provided for as heirs under Islamic law. So non-Muslim wife or parents can receive from this portion. Any adopted children can receive from this portion. Any special needs children, right? So my brother has special needs, and so he's not able to work or care for himself. So my parents left more for him, again, with the knowledge that me and my siblings all agree. If one of us does not agree, then that person can get their full share, and the rest of us can, again, compensate and take care of my special Muslim needs brother. Or anyone else for good. So this part is open as far as what we want to do with it. But Allah tells us very clearly that inheritance is a means that Allah made for supporting one's nearest family, and one should not rob them of this opportunity or cause them to fall into debt. How do we know the wasiyah is only 1/3? There was a Sahaba, a companion of the Prophet ﷺ, who was on his deathbed, and his entire estate was 6 slaves, so he freed all 6 of the slaves. What do you guys think of that? It's a good thing, right? In the Quran it talks us all about fakku raqab, right? Free a slave. But in this case, his wife came to the Prophet complaining that the man distributed his entire wealth, his entire estate, on his deathbed, and that would leave his wife and his children destitute. So the Prophet ﷺ put the slaves into 3 different sections. So he freed 2 of them, and then which is 1/3 of the estate, and then the other 2/3 of the estate he kept for the wife and her children, right? Because again, inheritance is a means of taking care of your family. So what happens when you die? So those are all the verses on actual inheritance according to Sharia. I wanted to stop, see if there are any questions just on this portion. Okay, onto that. So then, what happens when you die? This is according to Sharia as well as according to Texas law. So according to Sharia, if there are things that have been borrowed by the deceased, they should be returned to the rightful owner. Any burial expenses or debts need to come out of the estate and be paid. Debts to people are paid. If they have written in your wasiyah, according to Hanafi and Maliki, if there are any debts to Allah, like if I am able-bodied and I have the finances able to go for Hajj and I have not done it, if I have not paid my zakat for this year, if I have not made up my fast and I've got kafara to pay and I haven't done it yet, Hanafi and Maliki say that you can pay this if it is written in the wasiyah and only up to 1/3 of the estate. So debts to Allah are paid. And then wasiyah, anything else up to 1/3. And then after that, you distribute the assets according to Sharia. Under Texas law, probate is what happens. Probate is a process where the court determines if there is a will, if that will is valid, and then it appoints an executor and oversees the distribution of the person's property. If the person dies without a will, then again, probate has to happen, and the court will decide on who is the executor, who is the person who is going to go out and figure out where are your assets, who are your heirs, and make sure that they find any creditors, they pay any debts, pay any income and estate taxes, and then they distribute the assets according to Texas law. There are, again, 4 main principles when it comes to estate planning. Your assets, right? Your equity, everything that you own, your bank accounts, your 401k, your insurance, your mutual funds, all of that. Your family, your children, your spouse, how do you make sure your kids are taken care of in the manner that you want them to be taken care of, that the right people are their guardians. Your comfort, so if I am in the hospital with end stage, cancer, may Allah protect us all, right? What are my wishes? And how are my wishes conveyed about, do I want to be on a ventilator? Do I want to be resuscitated? Making sure that the right people that have been appointed to make medical decisions for me, or some specific people who I might not want to make medical decisions are not the ones making medical decisions for me. Making sure that people can reach into my bank account and pay my mortgage, pay my kids' Islamic school tuition, pay the bills that need to be done. And then the 4th part is if you have a business or not, and making sure that your business passes on to the people that you want it to go to, and that your family is able to extract the assets from the business and they're able to use it to support that. Some of the things to consider, making a will. And a will is a document that says, my name is Lubaba, I am not married and I have 2 children, and this is what I own, and this is where I want it to go. And I want it to go according to Sharia. These are the people who I want to receive my assets. These are the shares. This is how much the person gets. If they're not there, then this is who inherits and how that happens. And if they are not there, then this is what happens. And if none of that is there, then my trustee needs to go and find an Islamic inheritance calculator and put in who my inheritors are and come up with those shares, and that's how they divide my asset. Consider making a trust, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about trust. A healthcare directive. Again, if I am incapacitated, a healthcare directive says, okay, yes, I want to donate my organs. No, I do not want to be put on a ventilator. I do not want a feeding tube. These are my medical wishes. And this is who I want to make those decisions for me. A financial power of attorney allows my sister and my dad to reach into my bank account and pay my bills. Making sure that protecting your children and their property. Right? Who will care for your children? Who will care for their money and property? And those can and should be, I believe, 2 different people. ensuring that our children are cared for by Muslims and raised in a Muslim family. Life insurance, do you get it from your company? Do you have young children and a spouse? Do you not get it? I know that there are questions on whether it is permissible or not. And so again, those are the questions or discussions that you should be having. Understanding tax consequences, we want to make sure that you are not paying taxes on your estate, that none of your estate goes to the government, that it all is spent to our children. Funeral expenses, have you purchased a burial plot from ISGH, from the cemetery, right? Making sure that you do have a ghusl, and especially if you are a convert and your family is not Muslim, ensuring that you have a janazah, ensuring that you have a ghusl that happens. We've had multiple cases here in Houston where that has been a battle, and we don't want that to happen. And if your wishes are not written, then the state of Texas or your family will decide for you. Long-term care, if subhanAllah, people are living much longer these days, but that also means that we have more health issues as we're growing older. So are there ways for you to make sure that you are taken care of? So let's say you don't have a will, you don't have a trust. So the Texas plan is what happens. And this is, you have to go through the court process, probate process, which is designed for two primary reasons. The first is to notify and pay any creditors, and the second is to ensure that your heirs receive their assets. This is what that process looks like. It is a very long, I've seen it go in as little as 6 to 8 months, but I've seen it dragged out for 2 to 3 years process, where you have to go to the court to ask for things, right? So you get, there are certain things that the court will just give you as part of paying the mortgage, but if you need anything extra, if you need anything out of the norm, you have to go to the court and a judge has to agree to give you that money. Or your spouse will have to go do this, or your children will have to go do it, or their guardian will have to go do it. It is a public process, so everyone will know what you own, what your assets are, who your heirs are. Nothing is filed under seal, so it is an airing of your finances. And it's designed to pay creditors, so all your assets are frozen until the court decides what is a valid expense and pays off creditors. A lot of people do not like this process since it is very public and because assets are frozen, and it is expensive and long and confusing process. Lawyers have to be involved, have to be hired. There's a court and a judge. And again, if you don't have a will, if you don't have anything written down, this is what will happen. And even more so than that, the court will have to appoint who the executor is, who is the person who's going to manage that process. The pay for that executor will come out of your estate. And then, more importantly, your heirs will get more or less than the shares they are entitled to under Sharia. And then the court will decide who is going to be the guardian for your children. And so you will not have a say in who takes care of your minor children, which for us is probably the most important part. So the kids inherit under a will. Minor kids are not able to inherit until they're 18 years old. So all of the assets, including any retirement you have, any life insurance, is divided according to Texas law, and then it is thrown into probate. A judge will appoint a financial guardian to overlook the assets, and once your child turns 18, they receive all of the assets. So my son is 16. I wouldn't trust my son with $100 today, let alone $1,000 or multiple thousands of dollars, right? Just because the choices that he makes are not going to be the choices that I would make for him if I was around. And so in order to protect our children and make sure that there is oversight of their inheritance so they don't spend it frivolously, you create a trust. And what the trust does is it appoints someone else to be the trustee, to manage it. So for me, for example, my sister is my trustee. So if God forbid something happens to me, my sister manages all of the assets for my children. And if, let's say, Yusuf comes and is like, Khala, I need a car. Khala's like, yes, you can have a car. He's like, I want to buy a $40,000 car. Khala's like, yeah, here's $6,000 to get a beater car that you can drive throughout, high school, college, and through your first job until you're old enough or responsible enough, and then you can buy your $40,000 car. Until that time, this is what you have. And again, this ensures that the assets are not wasted frivolously by our children. And again, we don't know who the judge will choose as the financial guardian or the guardian who will actually take care of them on a day-to-day basis. The other problem with not having a will and not having people know where your assets are and what your assets are is that we have a Texas Department of Unclaimed Property. And this is actually statewide. So every state has a Department of Unclaimed Property. So if your family doesn't know that you have a bank account at Bank of America or at Chase or at Capital One, they only know about this one bank account. That bank account will be, that's not claimed, goes to this Texas Department of Unclaimed Property, and it just sits there until you claim it. So right now, that has over $6 billion that are just sitting there that have not been claimed because nobody knows. So the importance of making sure that your spouse knows where is the money, where are the assets, and who is in charge of them. The goal is, again, to keep these dollars for you and your family. The last thing I'll touch upon is separate and community property. We are in Texas, which is a community property state. So separate property is any property that is owned or claimed by the spouse before marriage, or if during marriage I received money as a gift from my parents or a gift from anyone, or I received inheritance or certain personal injury claims, those become separate property. Everything else that is acquired by either spouse during the marriage that is not separate property is community property. And that means that that it's owned by both of you 100%. Any real estate owned by either party is presumed to be community property unless you can prove that this is separate property that I inherited from my parents or I was given a gift. So what it means is that any property acquired by either party during a marriage is treated as community property, is joint, and therefore it is going to be divided in half between you and your spouse. Which again does not comply with Sharia, but that's a whole other story. So what happens if you die without an estate, without a will in Texas? Okay, so we talked about what happens in Sharia, what is the ideal scenario. This is what happens if you die without a will in the state. So if you are a single person and you have no children, your parents receive your assets equally, 50-50. If only one parent is alive and you have no siblings, then that one parent receives everything. If you have siblings, or nieces or nephews of deceased siblings, then the surviving parent receives half of the estate and the balance is split between the siblings equally. If you have no surviving parents or their descendants, the estate passes to your brothers and sisters equally, with again nieces and nephews receiving their parents' share. If you have children, if you're single and you have children, then it only goes to your children. That's who inherits, only your parents do not inherit. If you're married, your surviving spouse will inherit all of your community property if all of the children are of that marriage. If you have separate property, your spouse receives 1/3 of that, as well as a life estate. That means that they can use the property while they are still alive. They do not own it. It will go to your children eventually, but your spouse will be able to live in it, to use it for 1/3 while they are alive, and then it goes to your children, and everything else is inherited by the children of the deceased spouse. So the community property, so all of your interests, all of your 1/2 interest in the community estate will pass to your children, with your spouse keeping only his or her 1/2 interest. And if you do not have your children, then your spouse receives everything, inherits everything. So here's a sample. I'm going to make it easy. It's just the deceased person and their spouse, and they've got their 2 children. So under Texas law, since the kids are from the same marriage and there's a surviving spouse, they inherit 100% of the community property. And the spouse inherits everything. And the spouse also receives 1/3 of any separate property and the life estate of 1/3 of the property. The rest goes to your children. Shari'an, if it's the deceased is the husband, the deceased is the wife, he will get 1/4 of the wife's estate since there are children. If it is the wife, she receives 1/8 of her husband's estate since there are kids. And the kids, there are 2 children. If they're 2 boys, they will share everything 50-50. If they're 2 girls, they will receive 1/3 each, right? They will share that 2/3. And if it's a girl or boy, she receives 1/3 and he receives 2/3 of whatever is left. Does that make sense? Your eyes have started to glaze over. Another one, which same story as far as the deceased, the spouse, and the children, but there's mom and dad. Under Texas law, since all kids are from the same marriage and there is a surviving spouse, they inherit 100% of the community property. So anything earned by either spouse is owned by the second spouse. The children do not inherit, the parents do not inherit. If the spouse has any separate property, things that were given to them, gifted to them, or they owned it before marriage, the spouse will receive 1/3 of that property in a life estate, ability to use the property while they are alive, to 1/3 of the real property, and the rest goes to the children. Shari'an, husband gets 1/4 since there are kids. Wife gets 1/8 since there are children. Mom and dad each receive 1/6. And then the kids would receive the same. Boys share equally. Girls receive 1/3 each. Boy and girl, she receives 1/3 and he receives 2/3. This is again after any debts are paid, after any wasiyas are made up to 1/3 of the estate. This is what would happen to the rest. So to create a valid will in Texas, you have to be a person who has a sound mind, of at least 18 years old. It has to be in writing. It has to be signed by the testator or at their direction. The testator is the person who is writing the will. And it has to be attested to or witnessed by 2 competent witnesses at least 14 years of age who sign the will in the presence of the testator. And once you've written the will and it's been signed and notarized, you cannot strike through it. If you create a valid will, you will have the power to give according to Islamic law and Texas law. If you do not have a valid will, then again, it falls to the rules of intestacy, which is dying without a legal will, which again, does not follow Sharia, but follows the laws of Texas. And someone will have to go to court to get guardianship over your minor children or any adult disabled children, and you will not get a say in that choice. Any questions? Yes?
You said that you cannot strike through it, so do you have to repeat the entire process if you want to make changes to the will?
Yes.
Do you have a will already written, like a template?
I do not, but I know ISNA has a template, I know ISJH has a template, and then there are also organizations such as MyWasiya and ShariaWiz.com. ShariaWiz was written by attorney Abid Awad. MyWasiya was written by Sheikh Joe Bradford, who is local as well as a member of other attorneys. And those are ways that you can create, it's a simple form where you plug in information. If you have a really simple estate, then that is definitely better than having nothing. That's where I send people.
Excuse me.
Yes.
question.
If a person dies without leaving a will, the community property, is that automatically goes to the spouse? Like, let's say they have a house, car, the community, does that go automatically to the spouse without going through the probate process?
It depends on how it's titled. So if the house is in my name and my spouse's name as joint tenant with right of survivorship or tenants by the entirety, then yes, it passes automatically.
Without probate?
Without probate. Car, same thing. If it's in both of our names as joint tenants, it passes automatically, right? The spouse would need to get an affidavit of death as well as a copy of the death certificate to get it retitled into her name only or his name only. But things like bank accounts are also things that you can do this with, and we'll talk about non-probate transfers in a little bit, where we can talk a little bit more about how that happens and how to do that.
Okay. So like a bank account that has both spouses' name on it, that would be community property.
Yes.
And if the one spouse dies and there's no will, it could go to the other spouse without having to go through probate.
Exactly.
Okay. But it has to be, you said something has to be done first for that to happen, or like it has to be titled in certain ways?
Well, again, if it's only titled in my name, but it is community property, but if my wife doesn't know about it, then it goes to the Department of Unclaimed Assets.
Oh.
If my wife knows about it, then she has to go to probate to get it, since her name wasn't on it, and there was not a payable on death or transfer on death notice.
Okay. But if both spouses' name is on the title, then there's no problem there?
Then there's no problem. The only problem becomes if something happens to both of them, then what?
Oh, okay, yes. Thank you.
Can it be written by any person, or it has to go through the lawyer, or should it be notarized?
The will, so in Texas, a holographic will, a handwritten will is valid. So if you handwrite your entire will and it's signed and dated, and it's in your handwriting, that is a valid will. So that is, if you have, like, if there are no options, that is what I tell people to do. Go home, write it down quickly. This is who I am. This is who I'm married to. These are my children. I want my assets to be divided according to Sharia. This is who I want to be my executor. And you can just Google holographic will Texas sample and just use that as a template. The only thing I would add in there is I want it to go according to Sharia, according to Islamic law, and use an Islamic inheritance calculator. And then the other thing I would add is guardianship. This is who I want to take care of my children, and write multiples, right? So like my sister is my first one, and then it's my other sister, and then it's my dad, and then it's my friend, right? I have multiple people, so in case something happens to one or two of them, there are still options. So it doesn't have to be updated every day. And then write down, who do you want to be the trustee? Who do you want to be the executor, the person to manage all of the assets? And again, my wife first. If my wife is not available, then, you know, this sibling. If not, then this friend of mine. So try and write down 2 or 3 different options. So that is if you have no options and you have no time, no money. If you have a little bit of time and a little bit of money, I would go with my Sharia Wiz or my Wasiya. And those are just, again, easy online forms that will allow you to have a will that will pass according to Islamic law. And those you will have to have signed and notarized and witnessed. And right now you can get a mobile notary to come over, and the witnesses just cannot be someone who inherits from you. So you can't have your wife and witness your will, or your child witness your will. Just someone who's disinterested, and will bring it to the masjid, have the notary come over and just quickly take care of it. If your assets are complicated, if you want to make sure that your children don't inherit at the age of 18, so if you have older children, or if you don't have children, then that's what I recommend. If you have young children, then I recommend that you create a trust. And what is a trust? A trust is it's a legal fiction. It is it's a will substitute, which means no probate, right? So, and what you do is you create this document. This is my trust, right? I've created it. It is the Abdullah trust. It dictates what happens to my assets if I am incapacitated, what happens if I die. It dictates who takes care of everything, who takes care of my children, who takes care of managing the money for them, how I want them to invest the money for my children, right? Making sure that even the investments that they make are halal investments, right? Making sure that I'm protecting my children in the best way and the most comprehensive way possible. And then it also says, you know, if my children need money for their school, for their livelihood, for medical issues, for college, they want to get married, trustee, use your best judgment and pay what you need to. When my son turns 25, give him 1/3 of the cash. When he turns 30, give him 1/3 of the cash. When he turns 35, give him the rest of his money. Right? And that just ensures that your priorities are very different at 20 versus 25 versus 30 versus 40. Right? It ensures that his inheritance will be there and it will be held for him for the long run. That he's not going to spend it all before he's 20 or 25 years old. So what this trust is that I've created, it dictates all of those things. And I, as the trustee, I hold the legal title, and my children and my parents who inherit under this trust, they have a beneficial interest. They are the ones who benefit from it. And then what I do is I create my assets in the name of the trust. So my house, when I bought it, it was bought under the name of Lubaba Abdullah. Right now, it is in the name of the Lubaba Abdullah Revocable Living Trust. Right? And so this document is what binds. My bank accounts are in my name, but they have a power on death or a transfer on death that put them in my trust. My business, same thing. It's still the Lubaba Abdullah Law Office, but I have a document that transfers it into my trust, so my trust is what manages my business after my death. And so what this does is you don't have to go to court with probate. These are all non-probate transfers because everything is listed in the name of the trust. So you avoid probate, you avoid that costly process. Yes, it is more expensive than a will, but it frees you in the long run because with the will, you have to go through the court process, and through that process, you have to hire an attorney. This is something that just passes automatically because I've already titled everything I own in the name of my trust.
Excuse me.
Yes.
In the trust, is there any limitation of trustees? I mean, number of trustees, one trustee or two trustees or more?
So right now, I am the only trustee in my trust. When I make a trust for a married couple, they are both the joint co-trustees. But then I've listed my sister as my first co-trustee after me. So if I die or if I'm incapacitated, my sister is the one that's in charge. If something happens to my sister, then my dad is in charge of my trust. If it happens to my dad, then my other sister is in charge. If it happens to her, then my friend is in charge. So I have listed out my hierarchy of who is going to be the trustee, who is going to manage the funds for my children, who is going to be the one that my kids are going to go to when they want money. So again, the trust is more expensive up front, but it is cheaper in the long run. So again, the benefits, a will has to go through probate, which is a public court hearing, which takes time, which takes money, and you have to hire a lawyer most of the time for probate. Trusts can ensure that parents and grandparents are supported, can ensure that wives and daughters are supported. It's often a tool to avoid hefty estate taxes, so if your estate is large, more than 13 million, then you can put funds in different types of trusts to make sure that nothing goes to the state.
So
Yes.
there is no minimum value of estate to form a trust.
No, there's no minimum value. So there's a federal tax on estates where decedent's assets are currently greater than 13.91 million, 13.9 million. And that tax does not apply if assets are left to a spouse, to a U.S. citizen spouse, or to a federally recognized charity. You can give gifts every year and you don't have to file a gift tax if you give up to $18,000 a year. The inheritance tax, just so you know, it maxes at 40%. Usually it varies between 18% to 40%. And again, this large number of 13 million expires in December of 2025. So after that, it will revert back to the 5.25 million or 5.49 million. So what happens if you're incapacitated? Incapacitated means that you are unable to handle your personal or financial affairs. Depends on the circumstances, how long you're incapacitated, and if you have family close by. If your physical or mental incapacitation can be temporary or permanent due to different factors, such as a terminal illness, a serious car accident, a permanent health condition, who is going to take care of your rent or make sure your mortgage are paid? Who's going to have access to your accounts? What medical decisions are going to be made? Who's going to make medical decisions for you? And are they the ones that you want? Like if they put you on a ventilator, on life support indefinitely. So these are all things that you need to consider about how you can protect yourself and your family if, God forbid, something happens. So I'm going to go home to my kids right now. If, God forbid, something happens to me, who is going to, if, God forbid, something happens on the way and I'm incapacitated, who's going to take care of them? Right? I want to make sure that my kids are never in foster care. So if my family is not here local in Houston, I want to make sure that there is a family who is nearby who can take them and sit with them until my family can get into them. I want to make sure that that someone's able to reach into my bank account and pay the mortgage so my kids don't have to move right away. Make sure that their schools are paid. Make things easy for them, right? Because having subhanAllah, death is something that we're supposed to contemplate regularly. And as Muslims, especially Muslims in America, we have forgotten that, and we tend to forget the fact that we are going to die, and that Allah tells us to remember death and remember and go to graveyards. And we tend to ignore it, which is why we don't plan for it, which is why we don't have our wills, why we don't have our estate set up in a way that takes care of it. But that is something that Allah will ask us about. So some of the things that you can do to protect yourself and your family is having a designation of guardian for minor children. So who you want to take care of your child, or who should control any money or property to care for that child. Designation of guardian for me. If I'm incapacitated, I don't want the state to appoint some random person to come and make medical decisions or make financial decisions for me. I want someone who I trust and who is Muslim, who is going to do it from a point of ihsan, from a point of excellence. A durable power of attorney lets you choose who can pay your bills or access your bank account, talk to your insurance company, your employer, sell and or buy property. Your medical power of attorney or healthcare proxy lets you choose who do you want to make medical decisions for you if the doctor says you cannot do so. And a living will tells your loved ones and your doctor how to proceed if you have a terminal or irreversible condition. The last thing I will touch upon is non-probate transfers, and this is what we were talking about earlier, which is joint tenants with right of survivorship or tenancy by the entirety. And in Texas, you can have non-probate transfers for your bank account, for your house, for your cars. You can have beneficiary designations for life insurance, IRA, employee benefits, and you can have a POD or TOD, a payable on death or transfer on death, for any security, for any promissory notes, for real estate, as well as for trust property. And what this means is if you have titled your account properly, they will pass automatically to your spouse or to whoever you have listed. Again, it might not pass according to Sharia, but it will pass outside of probate. The last thing that we'll just talk about is waqfs, endowments, and this is something that we talk about constantly when we do these presentations, because again, we have up to 1/3 of our assets that we can do what we want to with. And a waqf or an endowment is a support for our fellow Muslims and our Muslim organizations. And if we have these waqfs set up, we will not have to have fundraisers every Ramadan. And again, this is a sadaqah jari. This can be a sadaqah jari. It can be a continuous charity that benefits us long after we have left this world. They have been called to be a weapon bearer, right? They're the doors to goodness. If you look at U.S. hospitals and universities, they have billions and billions of dollars in their endowments. Right now, if you look at the students that are protesting on campuses to encourage their schools to divest from Israel and to divest from supporting the genocide that's happening right now. I saw a graphic on social media that said that, I don't know, it was like 30 schools, 40 schools that had almost that had over $500 billion of assets. These are universities. So if they all divest, like the importance of that. These have been used for thousands of years in very creative ways, right? We can think of our masajid, we can think of our schools or our hospitals or mental health facilities, but under the Islamic golden era, we used to have awqaf for not just hospitals, but mental health facilities. Farm animals, once they're old and unable to work the farm, they would go to these pastures where people will take care of them, right? Students would receive money from these endowments for research. If you had a servant and they accidentally broke something in your home, they could go to an endowment and say, I broke this plate, so that the money is not coming out of that servant's pocket, it is going to them. Old people who don't have families to care for them. This is what our history is. This is what our Islam is, right? It is making sure that we are caring not just for our masajid, but caring for our societies at large. So some final takeaways. Children are our most important asset. Endowments are an essential part of our religion and an important way to safeguard the future for our children. Wills do not avoid probate, and probate can be a long, public, and costly process. Living trusts can bypass the court process and allows for privacy, immediate access, and control. Having a review of all of your assets has to be a part of your estate planning conversation, making sure that the Department of Unclaimed Assets does not get any of our money. And estate planning requires intentional action, and that planning keeps you in control, keeps you informed, and is a huge cost savings. The state of Texas's plan is not ideal for those families. It does not protect your dollars, nor does it protect your children. And just a few things about me. We do not do hourly fees. We have very transparent pricing, and it's a flat fee. It doesn't matter how many times you call, how many times you meet. And the plans are custom designed for you and your family and your assets. And our goal is to also be a trusted advisor who will be with your family for the long term. And you can have a free 30-minute consultation if you hop through our website. And the website is just abdullahlawoffice.com. And my email and my work cell number are right there. So questions? I know that was a lot of information I just threw at you over the last hour and hour and a half.
I wondered if you have visiting cards here?
I might have some business cards, yes. I didn't drive my car. I have business cards in my car, and someone was blocking my car, so I took my dad's car and didn't realize until after I left. I might have some. But if you go to my website, abdullahlawoffice.com, you can schedule a free consultation to meet with me. Any other questions, comments, or concerns?
Is there like a resource for, because you mentioned a lot of information here. So is there a resource that kind of also has this information in like a succinct way?
Not yet, I'm working on it.
Oh, okay.
There are multiple books that have been written. They tend to be very dense and not very practical. But if you shoot me an email, I can send you the names of some of those books.
Thank you.
Okay, jazakumullah khair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lubaba. This was a very great talk. I really, really appreciate your time.
We will share your contact information maybe on our group if people want to reach out to you and have further questions. Jazakallah khairan.